A black girl was cleaning the office when the millionaire noticed her. And when he found out why, he cried, "What the hell are you doing here?" Daniel Richardson's voice echoed through the quiet office on the 42nd floor, when he saw the small figure kneeling on the marble floor, vigorously scrubbing a non-existent stain. The girl raised her head slowly, her large, expressive eyes meeting his without fear, though her small hands trembled slightly as she held the damp cloth. "I'm cleaning, sir," she replied in a voice too clear for someone who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Mrs. Johnson said, "If I did a good job, I could sleep in the storeroom tonight." Daniel, president of Richardson & Associates, one of New York's largest financial consulting firms, felt a chill run down his spine. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, and he had returned to the office just to pick up some forgotten documents. "Your name is Isabella, sir." "Isabella Turner." "I'm 8.5 years old," she replied with a precision that made Daniel's stomach churn. "I know how to clean, organize papers, and I'm very quiet when I sleep." Mrs. Johnson said, "That's important." The calmness with which the girl recited this information hit Daniel like a punch. During his 43 years of life, he had built a financial empire based on cold numbers and calculated decisions. But he had never encountered a situation that challenged his understanding of reality so much. "Isabella, where are your parents?" Daniel crouched down in front of her, noticing how big her clothes were and how worn her sneakers were. "My mom works the night shift at the hospital," Isabella replied, returning to scrubbing the floor. "She's a nurse, but she said she can't take me home because things are complicated there." Daniel looked around the luxurious office with its panoramic view of Central Park, then back at the girl working with movements too precise for her age. Something didn't make sense. What about Mrs. Johnson? Who is she? Isabella stopped cleaning and looked at him with an expression that mixed exhaustion and resignation. "She's the cleaning supervisor." She said, "My mother should be grateful I have a job here and that I should learn how things work at an early age." The words echoed in Daniel's mind as he watched Isabella return to her work. Margaret Johnson was known for her impeccable efficiency, but also for her particular attitude toward minority employees. Daniel had always ignored the subtle comments, focusing only on the results. "Isabella, have you done this before?" he asked, his voice softer. "A few times," she admitted. "When my mom can't drop me off somewhere else." Mrs. Johnson said, "It's better for me to learn to be helpful at a young age." "Because," she hesitated. "Because what?" Isabella stared at him with frightening maturity. "Because people like me have to work twice as hard to get half as much." Daniel felt anger begin to boil in his veins. But he remained calm. For years, he had been the typical executive focused only on numbers, but something in the quiet dignity of this girl was awakening a part of him he didn't know existed. "Isabella, drop that rag," he said, reaching out his hand. "You shouldn't be here." She looked at him suspiciously, as if adults promising better things were dangerous territory. "But if I don't finish, Mrs. Johnson will be mad at my mom and my mom needs this job." The simplicity of that explanation hit Daniel like a revelation. Here was an 8-year-old child carrying the weight of protecting her mother's job, working in a corporate office in the middle of the night, and all of it was happening under the roof of his own company. As Daniel processed the situation, something in his eyes changed. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about profits or strategies. He was thinking about justice. "Isabella," he said, his voice laden with a determination that even the little girl could sense. "I think you and I need to have a very serious talk with Mrs. Johnson." What Daniel couldn't imagine was that this conversation would reveal a network of exploitation that went far beyond what his eyes could see, and that little Isabella held secrets that would transform not only his company, but the way he saw the world. If you feel the same outrage that overwhelmed Daniel at that moment, subscribe to the Black Voices channel to find out how a single night can completely change the fate of two people and expose truths that some would prefer to keep buried forever. The next day, Daniel arrived at the office 2 hours earlier than usual. His conversation with Isabella had lasted until 4 in the morning, and every word the girl had said echoed in his mind like an alarm he couldn't turn off. "Mr. Richardson." Margaret Johnson appeared at his office door at 7:15, her posture rigid and her expression controlled. "I heard there was a misunderstanding last night." Daniel looked up from the reports he was pretending to read. Misunderstanding? Is that what you call an 8-year-old girl working in my office at 2 o'clock in the morning? Margaret adjusted her glasses with a calculated movement. The girl's mother, Nurse Carla Turner, begged me to let her daughter stay here for a few hours while she worked extra shifts at the hospital. I thought teaching responsibility at an early age would be educational. Educational. Daniel repeated the word as if he were tasting something bitter. And what kind of education exactly were you providing? Mr. Richardson, with all due respect, Margaret's voice took on a condescending tone that Daniel had never noticed before. People like the Turner family need to learn that nothing in life is free. I'm offering this girl an opportunity to understand the value of work. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching Margaret choose her words carefully. During the 8 years she had supervised the cleaning services, he had always considered her efficient and dedicated. Now he realized he had mistaken systematic cruelty for competence. And where exactly did you grow up, Margaret? Daniel asked, his voice dangerously calm. In Connecticut, sir. My father was, she hesitated, realizing the trap in the question. Let me guess. Lawyer, doctor, accountant. Daniel leaned forward. Someone who never needed an 8-year-old to work to keep a roof over the family's head. Margaret straightened her shoulders, her mask of politeness beginning to slip. Mr. Richardson, I don't see how my family background relates to the need to maintain proper disciplinary standards among subordinate employees. Subordinate employees. Daniel repeated slowly. Isabella is 8 years old. Margaret, she's not an employee. She's a child. A child who needs to learn her place in the social hierarchy, Margaret retorted, her voice gaining a firmness that revealed her true thoughts. Mr. Richardson, you built this empire by understanding that there are people who give orders and people who obey. I am simply ensuring that the next generation understands that reality. Daniel felt something cold run through his veins. There it was, the cold, hard truth. Margaret didn't see Isabella as a vulnerable child, but as someone who needed to learn her place. And that place in her mind was eternally below people like them. Margaret, where is Carla Turner right now? Working at the General Hospital, sir. Double shift to make ends meet. She's a hard-working woman. The way Margaret said hard-working carried layers of meaning that Daniel could now decipher. It wasn't a compliment. It was a categorization. And where is Isabella when her mother works those double shifts? Margaret hesitated for the first time. Well, there's a social program in the community, but it's frequented by people of the same social class. I thought exposing the girl to a more refined environment would be beneficial to her development. Daniel rose slowly, walking over to the window overlooking Central Park. Below, children played in expensive playgrounds while their nannies, many of them black like Carla Turner, watched from a distance. Margaret, do you have children? No, sir. I've dedicated my life to my career. Then explain something to me. Daniel turned to face her. How exactly did you become an expert in child development for children from families you clearly despise? The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret opened and closed her mouth several times like a fish out of water. Mr. Richardson, I think you're misunderstanding my intentions. Your intentions, Daniel interrupted, were to teach an 8-year-old girl that people like her exist to serve people like us. Correct. Margaret lifted her chin defiantly. Mr. Richardson, the real world has hierarchies. I don't see a problem with preparing people to accept their place in those hierarchies. There it was. The complete confession spoken with the calmness of someone who believes they are talking to someone who shares their values. Daniel returned to his desk and picked up the phone. Jennifer, I need you to cancel all my appointments for today. Something urgent has come up. Margaret frowned. Mr. Richardson, I hope you're not going to make any rash decisions based on. Margaret, Daniel interrupted, his voice laden with an intensity she had never heard before. You just revealed to me exactly who you are. And now I'm going to show you exactly who I can be. As Margaret left his office visibly shaken, Daniel remained staring out the window. For 43 years, he had built his life focusing exclusively on numbers, strategies, and profits. He had never realized how many Margarets he had employed, how many Carlas he had indirectly harmed, and how many Isabellas had suffered under his roof without him even noticing. But now he had noticed. And when Daniel Richardson noticed something, he took action. What Margaret Johnson couldn't imagine was that their conversation had awakened something in Daniel that had been dormant for decades. Not just indignation, but a sense of justice he thought he had lost in the cold corridors of the corporate world. Every condescending word she had uttered was fueling a determination she could never understand. 3 days had passed since his conversation with Margaret, and Daniel couldn't get Isabella out of his mind. Every time he walked through the company hallways, he saw only numbers on spreadsheets where he should have seen real people with families and stories. Jennifer, his secretary, called, "I need a meeting with the entire human resources team today at 3 o'clock. Mr. Richardson, that's unusual. May I ask why?" Daniel hesitated. "Internal audit. I need to better understand our hiring protocols." At 2:45, Daniel drove down to the General Hospital. Finding Carla Turner wasn't difficult. An exhausted black nurse rushing between patients on the afternoon shift. Exactly as Margaret had described with such disdain. "Nurse Turner." Daniel approached during a pause. "I'm Daniel Richardson from Richardson & Associates." Carla's face contorted with instant fear. "Mr. Richardson, if this is about Isabella, I can explain. She won't bother you anymore. I promise." Margaret said. Margaret said what? Daniel felt the familiar anger rising, that if Isabella was seen there again, I would lose my recommendation for the advanced nursing program. Carla looked around nervously. "Sir, I know I shouldn't have let her stay there, but I had no other choice. The social program closes at 6 o'clock and I work until 10 o'clock. Daniel processed the information. Margaret hadn't just exploited a child. She had used blackmail to silence the mother. "Carla, may I call you that?" She nodded nervously. "Margaret has no authority to cancel academic recommendations. Did this come through my office?" She said she had complete authority over human resources decisions. Lie number 2. Daniel felt the pieces falling into place. "Carla, would you sign a statement about what Margaret told you?" "Mr. Richardson, I need this job. Isabella needs me to have this job. What if I guaranteed that your job would be safe? More than that, what if I guaranteed that you would get into the advanced nursing program regardless of what Margaret says?" Carla's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that?" "Because your daughter taught me something I had forgotten about justice." Back at the office, the human resources meeting revealed more than Daniel had expected. "Mr. Richardson," said Patricia Miller, human resources manager, "our diversity ratings are technically within the law." "Technically?" Patricia exchanged uncomfortable glances with Margaret. "Well, we do have minority employees, but they tend to stay in specific positions." "What kind of specific positions?" "Cleaning, security, general services," Margaret replied with practiced calm, "positions where they can contribute appropriately based on their natural skills." There it was. It wasn't just about Isabella. It was about an entire system he had built without realizing it. And in executive positions, Mr. Richardson, Patricia cleared her throat. "We have strict qualification policies which are." The silence that followed was revealing. "Margaret," Daniel turned to her. "Could you explain to me exactly what qualifications Isabella lacks to, say, play on a playground instead of cleaning offices at 2 in the morning?" "Mr. Richardson, this is a specific situation." "How specific are the situations of all the other black employees who mysteriously can only work in appropriate positions here?" Margaret straightened up, her mask of politeness finally slipping completely. "Mr. Richardson, I see no problem with maintaining efficient organizational structures based on natural aptitudes and realistic expectations." "Natural aptitudes," Daniel repeated slowly. "Patricia, do you agree with Margaret's assessment of natural aptitudes?" Patricia hesitated, realizing she was walking into a minefield. Mr. Richardson, we follow established protocols. Protocols established by whom? By Margaret, sir. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For 8 years, he had let Margaret Johnson implement a system of corporate apartheid right under his nose. When the meeting ended, Daniel stayed in his office late. At 9 o'clock, he made a call. Michael, it's Daniel Richardson. I know it's late, but I need to hire you for something urgent. Michael Santos was the best corporate investigator Daniel knew, a brilliant lawyer specializing in employment discrimination cases. Daniel, it's 9 o'clock at night. This must be serious. More serious than anything I've ever faced. I need you to investigate my own company. Every hire, every promotion, every firing over the last 10 years. You're asking me to find evidence that could destroy your company? Michael, I'm asking you to find evidence that could save my soul. 2 hours later, Michael was in his office with a team of 3 investigators. Daniel, based on what you've told me, this could be bigger than we realize. If Margaret implemented a system like this with your implicit approval. She didn't have my approval. She had my negligence. And that may be worse. The legal implications are enormous. We're talking about potential lawsuits in the millions. Federal investigation. Michael, do you have children? 2. If your children found out that their father built a company that systematically prevents children like Isabella from having a future, what would they think of you? Michael closed his laptop. We're going to find everything, Daniel. Every email, every decision, every pattern, but you need to be prepared. This is going to hurt. It already hurts. As Michael's team worked through the night, Daniel stared out the office window. Below, the city slept, including an 8-year-old girl who should have been playing with dolls instead of worrying about where she would sleep the next night. For the first time in decades, Daniel Richardson wasn't thinking about profits or corporate strategy. He was thinking about how to explain to Isabella that the world didn't have to be the way Margaret Johnson wanted it to be. What Margaret didn't know was that every condescending word she had uttered over the years was being meticulously documented. Every discriminatory decision was being mapped out. Every life she had affected was being catalogued. And when Daniel Richardson decided to document something, he did so with the same relentless precision he had used to build an empire. Only this time, he was building something completely different. He was building justice. The following Monday, Daniel called an extraordinary meeting of the executive board. Margaret Johnson entered the conference room at 9 o'clock in the morning with her usual confidence, unaware that she was walking straight into her own professional execution. Gentlemen, Daniel began, addressing the 12 board members. Today, we are going to discuss some findings regarding our human resources protocols. Margaret settled in quietly, adjusting her glasses with her usual arrogance. Next to her, Patricia Miller looked nervous, but Margaret attributed that to the natural pressure of corporate presentations. Michael, Daniel motioned to the lawyer waiting in the corner of the room. You may begin. Michael Santos approached the projector with a stack of documents. Over the past 72 hours, we have conducted an audit of this company's hiring processes over the last 10 years. Margaret frowned. Mr. Richardson, I was not informed of any audit. Margaret, Daniel interrupted her with icy calm. You'll want to hear this in silence. The first image projected was devastating. A graph showing that of the 243 employees hired under Margaret's management, only 17 were black, all assigned exclusively to cleaning and security. That's a statistical coincidence, Margaret began, but her voice was already shaking. Michael clicked to the next screen. It was an email from Margaret to Patricia regarding candidate Williams. Excellent qualifications, but we need to consider whether he would fit the cultural profile of the team. I suggest directing him to a more suitable position. The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret turned pale instantly. That email is out of context, she tried, but Michael was already showing 15 similar emails, all with the same coded language to exclude black candidates. And now, Michael continued relentlessly, the phone recordings. The audio echoed around the room with Margaret's unmistakable voice. We need someone who has the right profile, someone the clients feel comfortable with. You know what I mean? Margaret stood up abruptly. That's illegal wiretapping. All done on company equipment during business hours. Michael smiled coldly. The legal property of Richardson and Associates. Daniel watched Margaret begin to panic. For 8 years, she had operated her systematic discrimination, thinking she was protected by subtle codes. Now, every word was being laid bare. And finally, Michael saved the worst for last, the case of Carla Turner. Margaret visibly cringed as she heard her own voice played back. The recording where she had clearly blackmailed Carla, forcing a desperate mother to accept that her 8-year-old daughter would work as a cleaner. This is a setup. Margaret exploded, completely losing her composure. Daniel, you're sabotaging me over one isolated incident. Isolated. Daniel rose slowly. 47 families systematically harmed. An 8-year-old child forced to work. That's isolated. Margaret looked around the room searching for support. She found only faces of discomfort and visible disgust. The discrimination suits could run into the 8 figures, Michael continued. A federal investigation is inevitable. Margaret finally understood. It wasn't just about Isabella. It was about an entire system of discrimination that she had built, believing she was safe behind her position of power. Margaret, Daniel looked her straight in the eye. You have a choice. Resign now with a letter acknowledging philosophical differences or face termination for cause and lawsuits for discrimination and child labor. Child labor, she whispered, tears beginning to fall, not from regret, but from anger at being exposed. Forcing an 8-year-old to work in exchange for shelter is exactly that. Margaret Johnson left the room carrying only her purse, leaving behind 8 years of power she had used to perpetuate a system she believed to be natural. At the door, she turned one last time, searching for some sign that this was a nightmare. Daniel watched her leave without a word of pity. True justice does not come from shouting, but from the cold, systematic exposure of the truth. As the board members processed what they had witnessed, Daniel thought of Isabella, who was at school at that moment, something Margaret had tried to convince Carla was an unnecessary luxury for people like them. What Margaret could never have imagined was that her downfall was only the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel had discovered that building justice required the same relentless precision he had used to build wealth. And when he applied that precision to something, the results were irreversible. But the real transformation was yet to come. Not just in the company, but in the life of an 8-year-old girl who would finally discover what it meant to have someone fighting on her side. 6 months later, Daniel was in the same office where it had all begun. But now everything was different. Through the window, he could see Isabella playing in the park across the street. Not as a working child, but as any 8-year-old should be, free, laughing, just being a kid. The transformation at Richardson and Associates had been radical. The new human resources director, Carla Turner, yes, the same nurse Margaret had blackmailed, had implemented policies that became a national model for other companies. Mr. Richardson, Jennifer, his secretary, entered with a folder. The results of the semester's diversity audit are in. Daniel opened the documents and smiled. In 6 months, the company had hired 42 new employees, 31 of whom were from ethnic minorities, all in executive and technical positions based purely on merit and qualifications. And there's more, Jennifer continued. Forbes magazine wants to do a story on our corporate transformation. It seems other companies are copying our model. Across town, Margaret Johnson was leaving her 3rd failed job interview of the week. Her reputation in the corporate world had become toxic after her discriminatory methods were exposed. The lawsuits filed by the families she had harmed cost her savings and her home. Unfortunately, we don't have a position that's right for you, her last interviewer had said, using the exact same kind of coded language she herself had once employed. Ironically, Margaret now knew exactly how it felt to be judged not on her qualifications, but on subtle systematic biases. Meanwhile, Carla Turner was in her new office. Yes, she had left the hospital to become the director of human resources at Richardson and Associates. The advanced nursing program Margaret had threatened to sabotage, Carla had completed it with a full scholarship funded by the company itself. Mommy, Isabella ran into the office after school. Today, I learned about financial math. The teacher said, I can be anything I want when I grow up. And what do you want to be? Asked Carla, hugging her daughter. I want to have a company like Mr. Daniel, but one that helps children like me study. Daniel, who had arrived for a meeting, overheard the conversation from the doorway. Isabella, you know you can count on me for that, right? The girl ran to hug him. In recent months, Daniel had become an unofficial father figure to Isabella, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration for the intelligence and strength of character of this extraordinary child. Mr. Daniel. Isabella looked at him with a seriousness that sometimes surprised him. Thank you for seeing me as a child that night and not as Margaret saw me. Those words touched Daniel deeply. For 43 years, he had measured success only in numbers and profits. Now he understood that true success was measured by the number of lives you were able to transform positively. Daniel's company not only prospered after the changes, it became more profitable. It turns out that when you hire and promote people based on actual talent rather than prejudice, the quality of work improves dramatically. You know what the most ironic part of this whole story is? Daniel said to Carla as they watched Isabella draw at her desk. Margaret thought she was protecting the company by maintaining standards. In fact, she was preventing us from accessing the best talent. Carla smiled. Prejudice has never been a smart business strategy. It's just fear disguised as tradition. That night, Daniel went home thinking about how a single decision, the choice to truly see Isabella as a child who deserved protection, had transformed not only his company, but his entire understanding of leadership, fairness, and social responsibility. Margaret Johnson had tried to teach an 8-year-old girl about social hierarchies and knowing her place. Instead, she herself learned that in a just society, the only place that matters is the one you build with integrity, competence, and respect for others. 2 years later, Isabella Turner Richardson, yes, Daniel had officially adopted her, was on her first day at the best private school in town with a full scholarship created specifically for children from working families. And Margaret? She finally got a job as a cleaning supervisor in a small office building, earning exactly what Carla had earned when she was blackmailed years earlier. Life has a curious way of teaching humility to those who refuse to learn it willingly. This story reminds us that true justice doesn't come from destroying our enemies, but from building a world where future Isabellas never have to work to prove they deserve to exist. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on the transformative power of doing the right thing, subscribe to the Black Voices channel for more stories that prove that sometimes change starts with a single person deciding they will no longer turn a blind eye to injustice.